You're welcome to Global News and Zoom on Nigeria. The headline says Palestinians flee Nuseirat camp amidst attacks. Japan quake, 78 dead, rescuers 6 survivors. 950 SPN court documents released. US coalition warns Houthis of Red Sea raids. And Japan uncleared takeoff leads to deadly runway crash. On Israel-Gaza war, persistent Israeli bombardment in the Nuseirat refugee camp has forced numerous of Palestinians to flee from the central Gaza Strip once again. On Tuesday, Israeli attacks pounded the area, forcing residents to flee. Some left on food and on donkey-pull carts amidst a lack of much-needed fuel. The streets were muddy and flooded after a night of heavy rainfall. Others stacked mattresses, blankets, and other necessities on the top of small vehicles as they headed towards Deir al-Balah and Rafah. They said the Israeli army issued fresh evacuation orders as it continues to deepen attacks on the area. At least 207 people were killed over a 24-hour period, according to Gaza's health ministry. The evacuation comes days after the Israeli army ordered residents to flee parts of the Nuseirat camp as well as the Burich refugee camp. Those who fled used a smaller road inside the camp instead of the major Salah al-Din street that stretches across the length of Gaza. Israeli soldiers, tanks and snipers remain stationed there. In previous evacuations, Palestinians fleeing parts of northern Gaza have been arrested, shot at and even killed despite it being declared as a safe route by the Israeli army. Several among the displaced people already battling with the ramifications of former evacuations during the almost 90 days of conflict believe that this newest orders further deepen the humanitarian crisis. Many are cramped inside the Rafah governorate in southern Gaza. The health ministry has warned that disease there is spreading amidst a lack of supplies, medicine, clean water, and fuel. United Nations-run schools, which have become shelters, are also overcrowded. The United Nations says nearly 1.9 million people have now been displaced and over 80% of the Gaza Strip's pre-war population. Southern areas, including Deir al-Balah and Rafah, face continuing bombardment from Israeli artillery and warplanes, rendering no place safe for evacuees. Talking natural disaster, over 50 people have been reported missing as Japanese rescuers battle the cold to reach communities that remain cut off 3 days after a devastating earthquake hit the country's western coast. According to local authorities, at least 78 people have been confirmed dead and 330 wounded since the magnitude 7.6 earthquake off the Noto Peninsula on January 1st. On Thursday, officials published a list of 51 people from 3 cities whose whereabouts could not be confirmed, and over a dozen communities have been cut off. Soldiers, firefighters, and police officers from across Japan are searching through collapsed wooden houses and toppled commercial buildings for signs of life. Experts say the first 3 days are especially critical because the prospects for survival drop sharply after that. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida said at a government meeting on Thursday, "This is a very difficult situation, but from the viewpoint of protecting lives, I ask that you make every effort to save and rescue as many lives as possible by this evening when the critical 72 hours of the disaster must have passed." He announced that the number of troops dispatched to the area for rescue operations was being increased from about 1,000 to 4,600. The narrowest of the hard-hit Noto Peninsula has added to the challenges in reaching some communities. Water, power, and mobile phone services were still down in many areas. In Wajima, where a massive fire ripped through parts of the port and the district surrounding it, people queued for water and food. The quake buckled and tore apart roads, making it even more difficult to access the hardest hit areas. The full extent of the damage and casualties remains unclear 4 days after the deadliest quake in Japan since at least 2016. All the deaths have been reported near the epicenter of the quake in Ishikawa Prefecture. Over 33,000 people have been evacuated from their homes and about 100,000 houses have no water supply, according to officials in the area. 4 of the world's tectonic plates meet in Japan, making the country particularly prone to earthquakes. It experiences hundreds of tremors every year, but most cause little to no damage. Earthquakes have hit the Noto region with intensifying strength and frequency over the past 5 years. In 2011, Japan's northeast was hit by one of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded. The magnitude 9.0 undersea earthquake triggered a massive tsunami that wiped out entire communities and triggered a meltdown at the Fukushima nuclear plant. At least 18,500 people were killed at the time. On crime, the names of lots of prominent men with alleged connections to sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein have been publicly released after court files that form part of a 2015 case brought by one of Epstein's main accusers were unsealed. The depositions and statements were part of a long-settled defamation case brought by Virginia Giuffre against Ghislaine Maxwell, a British socialite who was once Epstein's girlfriend. Maxwell was imprisoned for 20 years in 2022 for sex crimes she committed with Epstein, who died by suicide in prison in 2019 while awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges. Loretta Preska, New York judge, ruled last month the documents could be unsealed, saying there was no legal justification for keeping them private. The first tranche of documents, running to nearly 950 pages, began to be released on Wednesday night and largely consisted of already public material revealed through nearly 2 decades of newspaper stories, TV documentaries, interviews, legal cases, and books about the Epstein scandal. More papers are expected to be unsealed or unredacted in the coming days. Dozens of women have accused Epstein of forcing them to provide sexual services to him and his guests at his private Caribbean island and homes he owned in New York, Florida, and New Mexico. The records provide a reminder of how Epstein hobnobbed with famous and powerful figures, including bankers, royalties, and celebrities. The latest documents include references to men including former United States President Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, Britain's Prince Andrew, billionaire Tom Pritzker, and lawyer Alan Dershowitz. The appearance of the names in the court papers is not evidence of the wrongdoing and does not indicate that the men face allegations. Numerous have formally denied the claims made or having knowledge of the activities of Epstein, who pledged guilty to soliciting prostitution from a minor in 2008. Now, a group of countries led by the United States have cautioned Yemen's Houthi rebels of consequences unless they stop the attacks on Red Sea shipping vessels. Let our message now be clear. We call for the immediate end of these illegal attacks and release of unlawfully detained vessels and crews, said the statement released by the White House on Wednesday. The United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, Germany, and Japan are among the 12 signatories. The only country in the Middle East to sign the statement was Bahrain, which has strained a relationship with Iran, which is aligned with the Houthis. The statement comes after numerous reports that U.S. President Joe Biden's administration is considering direct strikes on the rebels if the attacks continue. The Houthis have said that the attacks in the busy waterway are an act of solidarity with the Palestinians in Gaza and that they are targeting ships with connections to Israel. The U.S. has sent an aircraft carrier, the USS Dwight Eisenhower, to the area and earlier announced a coalition of countries to protect movement in the Red Sea, through which 12% of global trade passes. The Houthis earlier on Wednesday claimed responsibility for a former attack on a merchant vessel in the Red Sea. The French operator CMA CGM said that its container ship was unharmed and suffered no accident. A CMA CGM spokesperson said the ship was headed for Egypt. The Houthi attacks in recent weeks have mainly been concentrated on the Bab al-Mandeb Strait. On Tuesday, Danish shipping giant Maersk extended a suspension of services through the waterway and the Gulf of Aden, South Yemen, until further notice. An official transcript of air traffic control communications released on Wednesday suggests a Japanese Coast Guard aircraft which was struck by a passenger plane at Tokyo's Haneda International Airport were instructed only to taxi to holding point and had not been cleared for takeoff. The fatal accident saw Japan Airlines Flight 516 crash into the Coast Guard aircraft after touching down on the runway on Tuesday, causing it to erupt into a terrifying fireball. All 379 people on the Japan Airlines JAL plane were safely evacuated, and what has been hailed as a textbook response from crew and passengers. 5 of the 6 crew members on the smaller Coast Guard aircraft died, according to reports. On Wednesday, Saito released the transcript of over 4 minutes of communications between an aircraft controllers and the 2 planes immediately before the incident, which shows that the Japanese Airlines flight have been given permission to land but does not show clear takeoff approval for the Coast Guard aircraft. In a further development, publicly available records appear to suggest that out-of-service caution lines decide to stop pilots from erroneously taxiing onto the runway could have been another factor in the crash. According to the transcripts, air traffic control gave the JAL passenger plane permission to land at 5:43:26 p.m. local time. The transcript, however, does not show clear takeoff approval for the Coast Guard aircraft, instead telling it to taxi to holding points at 5:45:11 p.m. The crew of the Coast Guard plane confirmed the instruction seconds later, according to the transcript. About 2 minutes later, the JAL flights collided with the Coast Guard plane on the runway, according to the timestamp on airport surveillance video. Saito, the transport minister, said, according to report on Wednesday, that the incident is still being investigated, and the next measure will be to listen to the audio recording of the conversation between the Coast Guard pilot and flight control tower. He added that the Transport Ministry is taking every precaution to stop such an accident from occurring again. On more stories, top oil producer expands foothold in China. The world's largest integrated oil and gas company, Saudi energy giant Aramco, is planning to up its investment in its Chinese partner as it expands its footprint in the country. Aramco is in discussions with Rockshen Petrochemical to obtain a maximum 50% stake in the latter's subsidiary, Ningbo Chongjin Petrochemical, the Chinese company said in a Wednesday filing to the Shenzhen Stock Exchange. Rongshen, a Hangzhou-based privately owned refiner, said it's also deliberating the possibility of taking a 50% stake in Saudi Aramco Jubail Refinery Company, the refining unit of the Saudi company, citing a memorandum of understanding the two sides had signed a day earlier. Rongshen said the companies could also jointly upgrade and expand the Chinese subsidiary's equipment and build the massive Rongshen New Materials Zhoushan project. The project will make high-performance petrochemicals such as engineering plastics, special polyesters, and high-end resins that can be used in electronic devices and semiconductors, it said. Saudi Arabia has meaningfully reinforced its energy relations with China since last year. In March, Aramco agreed to buy a 10% stake in Rongshen for 24.6 billion yuan, that's $3.5 billion US, as part of the deal. It will apply 480,000 barrels per day of crude oil to the Chinese company. China has also sought to grow its presence in the Middle East country. Sinopec, the state-owned refining giant, has a joint venture with Aramco operating a refinery project in the Yanbu industrial city in Saudi Arabia. The Yanbu Aramco Sinopec refining company, which has been in operation since 2016, uses 400,000 barrels per day of Arabian heavy crude oil to produce premium transportation fuels, according to the company. Still ahead, U.S. asserts Hamas used Gaza hospital as command center. The U.S. doubled down on its assessment that Hamas and other Gaza militants used the enclave's largest hospital complex as a command hub, as well as to hold hostages and store weapons, with a senior intelligence official pointing to newly declassified intelligence that reinforces the conclusion of Israeli and U.S. intelligence. The U.S. intelligence community is confident in its judgment on this topic and has independently corroborated information on Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihadists' use of the hospital complex for a variety of purposes related to its campaign against Israel, the official said on Tuesday. but the intelligence U.S. community did not release any new evidence to support its assessment after questions were raised about to what extent the Al-Shifa hospital was indeed the beating heart of Hamas operations, as Israel has asserted. In late December, the Washington Post released said investigation that cast doubt on some of Israel's claims. Israel had come under widespread criticism for its November siege and assault on the struggling hospital, where doctors had described the situation as catastrophic. The new intelligence echoed previous allegations by the Biden administration and Israel in the days and weeks leading up to Israel's November raid on Al-Shifa hospital. That intelligence indicated Hamas had a command and control node in the tunnels under the hospital complex. A spokesman for the National Security Council, John Kirby, had also said the hospital was being used to store weapons and hold hostages. U.S. intelligence continues to believe that, according to the senior official, who added that the site held at least a few hostages. We have information obtained after the November 15 Israel Defense Forces operation that Hamas members located at the hospital had largely evacuated days earlier as the IDF approached the Al-Shifa complex, and that Hamas destroyed documents and electronics at the complex in advance of the IDF's operation, the official said. After Israel took control of the area, the military posted a series of videos of spokesmen showing weapons that were allegedly found inside the hospital itself, as well as the tunnel system under the hospital. In November, Hamas acknowledged using the hospital to bring in hostages as they meticulously monitored their health before detaining them in different locations after Israel released video from the hospital security cameras showing hostages being brought inside, but Hamas denied using the hospital as a command hub. In African scenes, Somalis rally against Ethiopia-Somaliland deal. On Wednesday, numerous of Somali residents assembled at the Kony Stadium in the Somali capital to express their rage regarding the recent agreement between Ethiopia and Somaliland concerning sea and port leases. Ethiopia is believed to have been granted an exclusive lease on the sea for a period of 50 years, which has raised worries about Somalia's sovereignty as a result. The Mogadishu Regional Administration organized the rally to let residents express their worries regarding the perceived encroachment on Somalia's maritime territory. In the scene, Somalis were chanting and holding banners throughout, worried that the lease agreement would undermine Somalia's national interests and put their livelihood in danger. The lease could create a precedent for further resource exploitation in Somalia, according to the demonstrators. Many others, including Hussein Gaisi, have advised the Ethiopian government to cease its violations and interventions. The Interior Minister of the Somali federal government, Ahmed Moualem Faki, said in a speech to the thousands of protesters at the rally that the federal government finds it unacceptable that we are ignored by an Ethiopian prime minister who belittles our federal government's role by legitimizing it. That's a violation and unacceptable. In their warnings about the dangers of the agreement, the speakers also urged the crowd to unite in order to defend the sovereignty of Somalia. During the rally, participants spoke about the potential long-term effects of the deal, as well as the need for a united front to combat any perceived threat to national freedom and economic stability that could be posed by the deal in the nearest future. Now let's take a quick break, and when I come back, I'll bring you stories from Nigeria. Don't go anywhere. You're welcome back. Now, stories from Nigeria says no plans to add fuel price, says NNPC and IPMAN. Yesterday, the Nigeria National Petroleum Company Limited, NNPCL, as well as the Independent Petroleum Marketers Association of Nigeria, IPMAN, refuted reports of a planned petrol increase to 1,200 naira. Some blogs and various social media handles had twisted a report by a national newspaper which sought to know what the pump price of the product will likely be if strict market forces were permitted to determine petrol prices. They thereafter ran with the story that the federal government planned to raise pump prices to at least 1,200 naira in connivance with the petroleum marketers. But in two reactions to the stories, the NNPC in its first response noted that the payment of subsidy had long been gone, while in the second it noted that there was no plan to increase fuel pump price rather. NNPC Limited emphasized it has not clashed with any party. The publication sought confirmation on alleged subsidy reduction, to which NNPC responded that subsidy has been entirely removed. A statement by the Chief Corporate Commissions Officer of the NNPC, Olufemi Soneye, stated the national oil company urged Nigerians to disregard the news, describing it as unfounded rumors. Speaking on the same issue last night, the IPMAN National Chairman Abubakar Maigandi noted that there was no such signal to raise prices from the NNPC, which is currently the sole importer of the products. Maigandi explained that he was also not aware that any subsidy were being paid on the product, insisting that if the sole importer says it's not paying any subsidy, then it should be believed as so. It stated that only the NNPC can tell the price of the product, stressing that although the situation whereby the NNPC is the sole importer is not ideal, it is what obtains for now. Emphasizing that there's nothing to fear, Maigandi stated that even if there is currently a minor scarcity anywhere in the country, it has to do with the festive period, which he said will soon normalize. He also said that apart from creating jobs, when the Port Harcourt and Dangote refineries begin operations, there will likely be a marginal reduction in pump prices. On politics, Atiku to head opposition alliance ahead of 2027 polls. 7 months into the 4-year tenure of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, political associates of Abubakar Atiku, presidential candidate of the People's Democratic Party (PDP) in the 2023 election, have said the former vice president will contest again in 2027, just as there will be a coalition of political parties going into the next general election to challenge President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. The revelation was made yesterday by Daniel Bwala, a spokesperson of the 2023 Atiku Presidential Campaign Organization, according to report. When asked if the PDP can put itself together and form a strong opposition in 2027, Bwala said, and I quote, "The truth of the matter is that there will be a coalition of political parties that will be very strong. This is a fact I know, and I don't want to talk about the details." He added that the upcoming coalition will swallow some of the elements creating problems in many political parties. According to him, the president will spend 8 years in office if the opposition party fails to form a coalition ahead of the 2027 general elections. He also accused Tinubu of instigating crisis in opposition parties, making reference to the political crisis confronting the Labour Party (LP) and the New Nigeria People's Party (NNPP). He also added that despite previous unsuccessful attempts at Nigeria's top job, Atiku will surely contest again for presidency in the subsequent general elections. But human rights activist Deji Adeyanju has given reasons why Atiku should resign from politics following the outcome of the 2023 presidential election. According to him, a combination of arrogance, inadequate human relationships, inability to manage the opposition, and several other lesser-known factors contributed to making Atiku lose the 2023 elections. Adeyanju, who made his view known in his New Year message, said if Atiku, who ran on the PDP platform, had managed the 2023 polls better, the results would have been different and Nigeria would have had a different precedent. He berated Atiku for failing to work with the likes of LP's Peter Obi, NNPP's Rabiu Kwankwaso, and Federal Capital Territory Minister Wike, and the G5 governors, which eventually paved the way for President Tinubu's victory. Another look at the top stories. Palestinians flee Nuseirat camp amidst attacks. Japan quake says 78 dead, rescuers 6 survivors. 950 Epstein documents released. U.S. coalition warns Houthis of Red Sea raids, and Japan says unclear takeoff leads to deadly runway clash. And that's all on the news. Thanks for watching. I am Lois Rek.